Now that we've finished the train, we can start to make the setting for the train. So the first thing we'll make is the train tracks. So making sure if you've moved your cursor around by putting objects on the train earlier on, your cursor probably needs to go back into the center of the 3D space. So what we can do is go up here to Object, Snap, and Cursor to World Origin. And you can do that to make sure your cursor's back in the middle. And that's always a good place to start when you're doing modeling. So we're going to make some train tracks. Let's add a cube to start with, and oops, accidentally added a plane. Try that again. Add mesh cube. And we're going to stretch this cube out to make a train track. Okay, so there's a few ways we can do this. You know how to use the scale tool now, and we could just scale it out like this and keep fiddling around with the shape. Or what we can do is access a menu up here, and if we press the N button on your keyboard, and then press item, we now can just type in the values for the shape that we want to create. So let's start with the Y value. So we want it to be, let's see what it looks like when we go 50 meters long. Okay, that's not actually that long. So we might go 100 meters long. And that's probably a little bit better. That'll be good to start with, 100 meters long. We might actually make it a little bit longer than that later on. So now talking about the width of it, we want it to be like the girder of a train track. So if we get that down to, let's see what that looks like, relative, so it's way too thick. Let's go a little bit smaller. zero point 0.3 might be good values. 0.3 because what we want to do is to put that underneath one of the train wheels, maybe even 0.2. Okay, I think that looks really good. So that's going to be one of the train track big steel girders. So what we will do is go to our top view and position that. Actually, I'll go to the bottom view and position that train track underneath the wheels like that. So I'm going to duplicate that train track now, Shift D, G to grab, and X to move it along the X axis, sorry. And I'm just moving that second track under those other train wheels. Let's just make sure from the front view. So it looks like we actually need to just move them both down a little bit. So I'm going to go click and shift click to select both of those train tracks, go to the front view and just move it down so that the train is just sitting just right on that track. Okay, excellent. Keep saving your work all the time, guys. So I'm going to now go to the top view again. I'm going to now, let's add in the cross beams, the wooden beams that will go across the train track. So we go add mesh cube again. Can't really see that cube too well. I'm just going to move it down there and let's get that into a scale. So just shorten the width of it. And again, we could do that down here. Or I might just close that menu now by hitting the N button. Sometimes it's easy to use that system, but in this case, it's easier just to use the scale tool, and that looks about right. Okay, go to your front view, scale it down there as well. Okay, and that's a train track sleeper, and that kind of just goes in the middle between the two train tracks like that. All right. So to help keep track of the different shapes and objects that we create, over here in the menu, we can actually make sure that we're giving the objects that we create some names. So we can see that this girder, this train track sleeper, has actually gone into this wheels collection here. We don't want it there. So if I press M, and let's just move it from out of the wheels collection into the main collection. And then up here in the main collection, where it's just been moved to, I can call that a sleeper. Okay. And then the same with this one, the train track. If I go M, I'm going to move that to the main collection. Let's call it track, track one, M, move it into the main collection, track two. Okay. So what we want to do is to now basically have lots of these sleepers all the way along the train track. We don't need to add in hundreds of them. There's a faster way of doing it in Blender. We're going to go to top view, scrolling out, and I'm going to move that sleeper all the way down to the bottom of where our train track begins down there. Okay, so with it all the way down there, I'm going to now select the modifier tool. Before I do that, we can see because we've changed the scale values a little bit, it's always a good idea to do a technique called applying the scale. So we go Object, Apply Scale, and that resets it all back to 1. And we should do the same on these two train tracks here. So Object, Apply Scale, Object, Apply scale. Okay, and that will be maybe not too useful in this project, but later on, if you want to apply things like some textures, some patterns onto your objects, you'll need to make sure that you've done that process. Otherwise, it won't look very good. So with this sleeper selected here, we're going to go to this icon here, which is the modifier function. I'm going to then go add modifier, generate, and we're going to select this one called array. And as soon as we hit that, you can see what it's done is copied that first sleeper and made a second one over here. What we wanted to do is to make copies, but going this direction. So you can see here it says factor x1. We're going to change that back to 0, and we want it to go in this direction. And so by just holding my mouse left button down, I can just sort of fiddle around with the spacing of that. That looks about right. 2, and up here we can have, we've got to figure out how many do we need to fill in our train track. So this is telling Blender how many copies of that object we want it to make. So all the way to the end there, and that's made, about 100. Okay. So now we've got 100 sleepers. I'm saving that. All right. So that's the first step in creating our setting. That's what our train will slowly move across in our animation. Okay, let's go to the top view again and let's add in some ground. So I'm going to go Object, Add Mesh Plane, and we want this plane to be quite large. So I'm going to go down here to the scale. I just held down my left mouse button and dragged down across all these scale values. And let's see, if I type in 50, that'll give us quite a bit of land to play with. All right, so this will be the grassy hills that we saw in the demonstration at the start. All right, we want that plane that we've just added in there to be sitting just below the train tracks. All right, can't quite see it there yet. So let's just move it down. That might have moved it down too far. Yes, it has. There we go. Okay, so now the train tracks are just sitting on the ground plane. Maybe what we should do shortly is add some colors to the train tracks and the ground plane so we can see clearly what we're working with. It's okay now, though, if we just go into this black and white view, and that also saves a little bit of memory for your laptops. Okay, so what we want to do is to be able to shape this land to add in some hills. We will do that through the edit mode. So I'm going to select the plane. Um, let's make sure. So it's adding the object into the wheels um, collections. So we want it to be in the main collection. So I've just selected M on my keyboard and hit collection. And if I actually have selected that, any other objects that we add, we'll just go to the main collection first. So there's the plane. Let's call it ground. And now we're going to go to the top view and into edit mode. Okay, so with edit mode, it's automatically just selected the face for me because that's the last one that I was on. Just select the selection tool there, and we're going to right click and select subdivide, and we're going to type in a value, let's see, 50. That will work okay, I think. So 50, we'll divide it up into lots of smaller little sections that we can then move around. Actually, I might just increase the value a little bit more. Let's see if it's 70. 70 will just make it a little bit smoother. Okay, that looks good. So I'm going to now activate the proportional editing. So up here, and that's how we created some of the curving shapes in the train. So proportional editing is now on. In that face select mode, if I just choose a random face over here, I'm going to hit on my keyboard G and Z, and you can see I'm just scrolling on my mouse wheel backwards, or if you're using your touchpad with two fingers, you can just move them up and down. And what that circle is showing you how much is being influenced. When I now move it up, if I move my mouse wheel backwards or down, it's influencing more of the shapes around what I've selected. So we're just going to create some gentle hills. So I'm going to just do one there, select one over here, hit G, Z, and I might make this one a little bit larger. So I'm scrolling backwards on my mouse wheel, put one there, G, Z. I might make this one a little bit smaller, get one in the background there, G, Z. Might make this one larger. Okay, and you can see how you can start to just create a landscape like that. So you create your landscape how you want it, but let's leave the area around the train track nice and flat. Otherwise, the train track will disappear underneath the hills. So go ahead and create your landscape. So once you've made all the changes that you feel will give your landscape a little bit of character, just go back to object mode, make sure you've saved your work, all the time saving it. And now what we can do is to create a little tunnel here, as well as some mountains that the tunnel is coming out of. So the tunnel will obviously just be a cylinder that will be going around the train track. So we can go, make sure you are in object mode, add, mesh, cylinder. Let's move it down here to where we want it to go. In the rotate value over here, we're rotating it around a little bit. let's go into this sort of a view here and let's scale it up so it's going to be large enough for the train. We might even move just so we can see what we're working with. Let's move the train back there. So the train is using the grab tool and move it back there so we can see how big we have to make this train tunnel. So click on that cylinder again. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Doesn't have to be too much bigger than the train. Something like that. Okay. And I think that's good where it's exactly sort of halfway um, sticking out through the ground there. So now we have to use some of the editing functions to just change the tunnel a little bit. Let's go into edit mode. Actually, before we do that, we can see the rotation and the scale values have all been mucked up a little bit through our moving of the object. So I'm going to go Object, Apply, Rotation and Scale, setting those values back to 0 and 1. Let's go into edit mode now. I'm pressing Tab on my keyboard to go into edit mode. And the first thing I'm going to do is to grab that face there, make sure we're on face select, and I'm just going to move that face backwards. I'm still in proportional editing, so turn that off. I'm moving the face back a fair bit there. So we've got, when we look at through the camera into the tunnel, we can see the tunnel has some depth to it. Okay, so I'm going to now go into this front face here. We're going to use the Insert Faces tool, and about that much. Now the Extrude tool, and we're going to push that face back a fair distance. So go to the side view there, and we can't actually see how far it's being pushed back in this view, but we can go to what's called X-ray view, where in X-ray view, we can see that's how far back that face has gone. If you want to go back further, you can then just select the move tool, and you can see you can just move it back like that. Okay. So now we've got a train tunnel. Take it off X-ray view if you've gone into that view. Okay, and it does look like it goes back some distance. The problem is, though, it does also look like the ground drops off very suddenly. So we might actually just move that train track forwards a little bit, the tunnel forwards a little bit, and then also move the train forwards a little bit. So that when we are looking through the camera later on into the tunnel, we might have to build a little bit more of the ground there. We might not either. Now we will add some mountains for the tunnel to be coming out of. So to do this, we're going to add a function to Blender. We're going to go up here to Edit and go to Preferences. I want you to make sure it's on Get Extensions. And if you just type in the word land into the search bar, you should get a result that says ANT landscape. And when you click on that, I've already installed this function. There should be an option here that says install. Just click install, and then you might have to wait a minute. After it's finished installing, you can then click on add-ons, and what you'll see is that this function that allows you to create a landscape has now been installed into Blender. Just go down here to this menu, make sure Autosave Preferences is selected, and now this function should be available anytime that you are using Blender again. So if we close that now, what we can do now when we go to Add Mesh, we will now see that we have this option here for landscape. Now, I found when I used this function on my school laptop, it didn't give me all of the options that I get on my home laptop, but we can still make it work. So when I click on landscape, we get this menu comes up here, which normally we would be able to change the values of and create all different types of landscapes. I couldn't get anything to change here, but what it's done, if we zoom in here, is added in just a mountainous bit of a shape here in the middle of our scene. So it seems like for our school laptops, that's all that our school laptops can handle with this function. So, but we can make it work anyway. So with that landscape selected there, what we will do is to move it to the end of the landscape there and put it over there somewhere. We're going to increase the scale enormously. So I'm selecting all the scale values and I'm going to change it to 50. And suddenly we've got this huge mountain here. So I'm going to rotate that around and just reposition it, moving it back till it's just sort of touching the edge of our landscape that we've created there. So now what we've got, that's pretty good, is a mountain that the train tunnel is coming out of. So now let's add in some background for Blender. So let's once again go to Edit, Preferences, make sure you're on Get Extensions, and type in the word sky, and this function here called dynamic sky appears. Hit install, go to your add-ons, and there we can see dynamic sky has been added. You can close this box here. When we now hit the N key, that brings up these options here on the sidebar. And if we click on create, we can see we've got the options here to add in the landscape. And if we scroll down, we can see here's our new function called dynamic sky. So click on that, scroll down, and then click create. Now, nothing much will happen until we go here to world properties. We will select this drop down menu here and select that option where it says dynamic. What that function does is it automatically puts Blender into a different mode. So go here to where it says render and select Eevee. And then we go back over here. And what we should be able to see, we have to go to the final rendered view to see the results of this function. So over here, let's scroll down. So what we can see is a nice bit of a sky has been added in here. Don't worry about all these little shadows here on the landscape. That won't be in the final version. Okay, so we can now just fool around with these values here. If you want to make the sky a little bit of a darker blue color, you can do that. The horizon color as well. I like to change that as well. The cloud color, if you wanted to change that to be a little bit creative, you can do that. Make it look maybe like it's sort of sunsetish or something like that. Golden sort of colored clouds. And we can also use this to control in which direction is the sun shining from. So it'll be a little bit hard to tell that unless we've got some objects. So let's just move the train out of the tunnel there. And when we move this sphere around, we can see there's a shadow emerging from the train. So what we'd like is for, if we were to do our animation and have this as mainly our front view, we would like the shadow to be being cast in that direction. So with a little bit of fiddling around, you can try to figure out how to get the shadows being cast in that direction. So there we are, extending out that way. Okay, so saving that. Now in this rendered view, your laptop's going to be working very hard to make us see all this detail on the image here. Okay, so only use this rendered view when you really want to. We can also, if you wanted to have more or less clouds, we can change that function as well. So that's one way of putting in a background. The other way of putting in a background is that you can actually just find an image of a background and install it just like we put the background picture of the train in there. So just to show you some difference, if I go add, image, mesh plane. Here's a picture of a cloudy sky background. It's very high resolution, so we can zoom it up, scale it up, and it will still look good. I'm just going back to the preview mode. So there's the image that I've just put in. Scale it up a fair bit, 50 times maybe. And I can just move that backwards into the background and try to position it in a way. I can scale it up even more. And we can try to make sure that that cloudy sky background will always be in our point of view. So that's the other way of doing it as well. Okay. So you choose whichever option that you think gives you the best results. I might just hide that background just for now, but I might put it back on later on. So now let's start to add a little bit of colour to our landscape. Let's start with probably the easiest thing will be is the grassy hills itself. So if we select the plane or the ground, we choose the material function and click new, and you can decide how green you want the grass to be. So I'm going to have mine sort of darkish green like that. And I'm going to call that material uh, green like that. For the mountains, just for now, what we'll do is just make them sort of a dark grey kind of colour, make them quite rough. Okay, and the train track, we've already, so select a train track. We've already, well, I did at least, I created a metal sort of a colour for my train earlier on. So I'm going to select that, select the other train track, select metal, and for the cross beams or the sleepers, I'm going new. Let's make some sort of like a woodish brown color. I don't want that to be shiny, so I'm going to make it completely rough. And there we are. Okay, we can make it a little bit more detailed, and I might show you a way of making that wood actually look like wood shortly. But what we will do is try to do something a little bit tricky with the tunnel here and make it look like it's made out of bricks. So just save that progress that you've done so far. Going down to the bottom of your screen, you get this option to move up this panel here. Right now, this is set to the timeline that we were using before to animate the train. Come over here to this drop-down menu and select Shader Editor and click that. So make sure that the tunnel is selected and we're going to click New, and we get these interesting boxes here. These are called nodes, and nodes are used to create different effects in Blender. So what we can do is to add a brick texture to the tunnel here. So we will go to Add, Texture, and then select Brick Texture. And just click it into the space here. There's a little color dot here. I'm going to click on that little color and drag it across and let it connect to where it says base color here. You can see as soon as I've done that, a brick texture has appeared on the tunnel. So what we can do now is just fiddle with these values here to try to make it look like bricks might appear in an old or a cartoonish train tunnel. So I'm going to, first of all, you can zoom in on these as well. So I'm going to just choose two different colors, sort of a reddish color, orange sort of color, and a darkish reddish sort of color. And the mortar is black, that's fine with me. So now what we want to do is just fiddle around with these values here to make it look like the bricks are actually in the opposite orientation. So brick width, I'm actually going to make it a little bit smaller like that. Row height, I'm just going to try to extend it outwards a little bit so we get a bit more of a horizontal brick shape like that. I might just fill around with a scale here. So that's making the bricks smaller. Might make the mortar size a little bit smaller. Oh, that's made it disappear completely. I can just type in a value there. Type in 0.01, and that's made it look like the tunnel is made out of bricks. So you can keep fiddling around with these values until you get a result that you feel is pretty good. I think that'll do, I think. All right. So you can see it doesn't really look that great on the front of the tunnel there. It's because it's applying a 2D texture to a 3D shape. So it's actually just wrapping that texture around. There's a few things we can do if that bothers you. We can add in another node. So if I go add node, input, and I'm going to select texture coordinate. And by adding in this, we can then connect this UV to the vector. And let's fix it up a little bit. It's changed the scale a little bit, so I might just go back here and readjust the scale. Okay, and that's making it at least the front part of the tunnel look like it's got bricks. Okay, we can see it's done something funny on the inside of the tunnel, but that's okay because what we can do is just add a dark color on the inside of the tunnel anyway. So let's do that while we're at it. I'm going to go over here and press plus, and I already have a black color. So black, I'm going to go into the object's edit mode. And if I go just so I can see what I'm selecting, by pressing Alt and click on one of those inside faces, it's now selected all the inside faces. I'll select black and assign. So now what we can see is the inside of the tunnel is black. Okay, while we're at it, in edit mode, I'm going to select the edge select here. Select one of those edges. I'm going to click edge, alt and click and select all those outside edges. And I'm going to put a bevel on that. So bevel, see what that does. It kind of just smooths the edges out a little bit. And with the black color selected, I'm going to put black in there as well. So we can see that's put a little bit of a black border around there. And I'm going to do the same thing on the inside. So I'm going to select one of those edges, holding down Alt and clicking one of the edges. It selects all the edges. I'm going to have the bevel tool selected and just create a little bit of a bevel there. Black, assign black to those faces that are selected. That just makes the tunnel look a little bit better, doesn't it? Okay, go out of that into object mode again. Save that. Um, those changes. All right. So you can do the same sort of thing if you wanted to add a little bit more detail to, let's say, the mountain or to the train tracks. You can go into this shader editor. So now when I've selected the mountain, it's got the color here that we've created for the mountain. And you can, if you wanted to, try to make the mountain look a little bit more realistic. If I go add texture, in this case, I'm going to do the noise texture. And I'm also going to go add converter color ramp. Okay, and you'll see what happens when I connect these nodes together. So the color joining to the factor, color from the color ramp into this color here. And now we get a bit of a spotted sort of thing happening there. But when I drag the black color up, we start to get a little bit more of an interesting texture here in the mountain. And again, I can just fiddle it around with some of the values here on the noise texture. I might change the color white to something a little bit darker. Okay, and maybe the color black is a little bit too dark. Something like that. And that just makes it look a little bit more interesting, doesn't it? So I might rename that texture mountain. And again, you can keep fiddling around with that to get a good result by changing some of the other values here. You can end up with something that looks like a little bit more, something a little bit more rocky. Okay. And we can do the same sort of thing for the train track. So if I select the train track, here is the brown color. I'm going to add the same nodes that I just added before. So a noise texture, a color ramp, um, and in this case, I'm going to add one other one, vector mapping, and move that over here. So I'm going to join color to the color, noise texture color to the factor, color to base color here. And I'm going to leave the black there, selecting the white one. I'm going to change that to our sort of brown woodish color. Okay, and let's just zoom in, get a little bit of a better view of what one of these sleepers looks like. So we can see, even just by doing that, what we've got is a bit of a woodish grain happening um, in the timber. So if I then connect up that value, we should need one more node in here, add input texture coordinate. So fiddling around with see, there we go. And we get this sort of a wood grain effect happening by changing the scale here. You can then try to adjust the roughness to make it look like it's got sort of a woodish grain texture. I wonder if we actually need that other node. Yeah, we do. So I've connected the UV to the vector. Okay, and let's rename that one wood. So nodes are a way of creating your own interesting textures that add a little bit more interest to your project. So if you like doing that, you can do the same thing with the colors that you've added to the train and make the train look a little bit dirty, or adding in some other different textures there. There's all different types of textures that you might like to play around with. We will use for instance, the wave texture in building our windmill to make it look like it's made out of planks of wood.